Rueckert, and I'm part of BookOrators, a global student organization that aims to instill a love for literature in youth. As part of our guest speaker series, we are joined by Miss Laura Rueckert, who is an author. Her debut novel, A Dragonbird in the Fern, has received amazing reviews from critics. We've reached out to her today because we wanted to share the experiences of Miss Rueckert and her journey to becoming an author. We are so excited to have you here today to talk to us and our viewers.
Sure. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you for having me. This is fun to be able to talk to you. My name is Laura Rueckert. I'm the author of A Dragonbird in the Fern. First, I have to show it off. And so what attracted me to being an author? I would say that I always wrote books or wrote stories in my head, even when I was a child. For example, if I watched a TV show and I didn't like the way it ended, then that was okay because I went to bed, and while I was laying in bed, I just rewrote the ending in my head. Or if I watched a movie and the video cut out before it was over, well, then I just finished it in my head. So I kind of always wrote. And then I would say when I was in college, and basically high school and college, I kind of thought it's really hard to make a living as a writer, and I wanted to have kind of a stable life. So I worked on other things. I got a different job, and eventually I had a family, and but I always kept thinking about, it would be nice to try and write a book again someday. And so one day I just started, and I actually finished it, and that was a shock to me. This wasn't it. I actually have written a few books since then. It took a while to find one and to create one that was good enough to be published. But so that's how I ended up writing. Sure. So A Dragonbird in the Fern is a YA fantasy, and it's about a princess named Jara, who has an older sister who was murdered. So Jara was murdered, and in their culture, when someone was murdered and nobody knows who was the killer, the person kind of stays around as a ghost, and they're very connected to their families. And the problem is they're so connected to their families that this ghost starts to become violent because they're angry at not, having the justice of the killer being maybe put in jail or something, but they're close to their family, so they start actually taking it out and becoming violent, on their families. And so what happens then is the older sister, was engaged to marry a foreign king for a political alliance, and he basically comes by and says, well, now that the older sister is, dead, I'll take the younger sister. We still need this political alliance. And Jara so she has dyslexia, and in her culture, they don't know what dyslexia is. And they, basically everybody just thinks she doesn't feel like reading, and they don't give her any credit for the fact that it's just really hard for her. And so she's kind of gotten this idea in her head that she's not smart and she can't learn. And the problem with marrying this king is that he doesn't speak her language and she doesn't speak his. And so she basically would be like, no, I am not going to marry this guy because I'm never going to learn his language. But then she finds evidence that her sister's killer probably came from his country. And so she knows if she marries him and if she goes to his country, she can look for the killer. And if she can get the killer arrested, then it'll basically allow her sister's ghost to rest and stop attacking her family. So that's what it's about. And I would say, some things like that are out of my family, like I have family members who have dyslexia, that definitely inspired that part of it. And also I myself am an immigrant. So I'm from the United States and I moved to Germany. And so I know firsthand what it's like to move to a different country and maybe to speak very well in the beginning, but to learn how to speak the language, and also to deal with customs that are different, things like that. Yes. So there were a lot of different inspirations. I think the first inspiration was a few years ago. I was on a tour of a castle somewhere in Germany. I can't even remember exactly where it was, but just that it was way out in the countryside. And the tour guide told us that, a few hundred years ago, the lady of the house was actually, I think, from France, and she wasn't supposed to marry the guy that owned the castle. She was supposed to marry someone else, and whatever happened, basically that made it so that she had to marry him. But she didn't speak German, even though she was very educated. And so it made me think, what would it be like to have a marriage like that, where you don't even speak the same language, but you basically have to. So that was the first thing. And yes, and then like I mentioned, so in my family there are people that have dyslexia, and I mean, there were two things there that kind of inspired that. One is that, like, my children have dyslexia, and when people found out that they had dyslexia, they said to me, "Oh, you should stop speaking English to them." Like I said, I live in Germany, and so they thought, okay, well, if they only have to concentrate on one language, it'll be much easier for them. And they thought I would make their lives way harder if I spoke English. On the other hand, I mean, I can speak German, but I feel more comfortable speaking English to my kids, and it's good for them to learn it. And I really didn't want to stop. So I did research, and I found that there are plenty of people all over the world who have dyslexia and are also multilingual. So that was something else that I kind of wanted to portray. Let me think if there... The other inspirations, I guess I would say, were the countries themselves are very loosely inspired by, so Jara's country is kind of like Venice, but if it was tropical. And then the country she moves to is kind of like Scandinavia, but landlocked. So it's not exactly, those countries, but there is some inspiration of that. So honestly, I think that every character has some of me in them. I mean, even whoever the bad person is, which I'm not going to say, but I think there's a bit of me in everyone for certain. I'm trying to think if there are other people I know in any of those characters. A little bit. I mean, there's maybe a little bit of my husband in the king or something like that. So yeah. So I would say definitely every book I write needs research of some kind, and it's always very different. For this one, I researched languages a lot because I made up a lot of words, and I wanted to make sure, for example, that I wasn't using actual real words like in Italian or something and then just using them completely wrong. So I had to make sure that the words I made up didn't actually exist. I looked a lot at how languages are put together and letters and things like that. I researched elephant birds, which is something that actually existed on Earth. So that's interesting. If anybody wants to go look them up, they're fascinating that they used to live on this Earth. They were like huge, huge ostriches. And I researched burials at sea, but I think the thing that I researched most of all was dyslexia, because like I said, my kids have it, but that doesn't mean that I know everything, right? So I basically did a lot of research online. I, of course, helped my kids when they were doing their dyslexia therapy sessions and, talked to their therapist a bit. But then what I also did was I got two authenticity readers who have dyslexia and are multilingual and are actually also authors. And so I had them read it to make sure, and they could tell me, okay, this isn't really realistic or something like that. And so that was really important to me. Even so, though, I mean, I do have to say, for anyone who reads it, if you do have dyslexia and you read it and you say, oh, this isn't exactly the way it's for me, I completely believe you, because it can be different for different people. I mean, my 2 children have it, and each of them experiences it in a different way. So I definitely couldn't cover like the full spectrum of dyslexia in just one person, just one character. So I think I would say, I mean, not specifically as a mentor, I read a lot. So basically kind of learning by absorbing, and by not only reading for fun, but also kind of really, as I'm reading and think something is particularly good, to try and stop and think, why did I think that spot was so good? Like, how did they make the character come across so well in so few pages, and things like that. And then what I have is critique partners. So those are other writers. Some of them have published books already, and some of them haven't. But even the ones who haven't, they're so talented. And so what we do is then we read each other's manuscripts kind of along the way, and then make revisions, and then send it to another critique partner, and then make more revisions. And that for me is so valuable, not only getting their feedback, but as a writer, you learn so much about writing from giving someone else feedback, because you're analyzing their story and what works and what doesn't, and what's clear and what's not. And then you kind of learn to use that in your own work. So working with my critique partners is, it's wonderful. Let's see. So I'm not a full-time writer. I actually have a regular day job. So my ideal would probably be not to have that day job, and just to be able to get up in the morning. I'm a kind of a morning person, so I'd love to just, open up my laptop and be able to work every morning. That doesn't work out though. So what I usually do is I get an idea first, and I let it I consider it like cooking. I let it simmer in my brain, and let it bubble a little bit and it can be really months that it's in there bubbling, until it gets to the point where I think it's enough information for me to write kind of a very rough outline. So that's my next step, is to write like all the major plot points that have to happen. And to also figure out, where I can tell I'm missing something, like, oh, something has to happen here that's horrible. So what could be horrible that happens there? So once I get all the major plot points and kind of a rough idea of the characters, I'm all the way through that. I guess I would say I keep notebooks, one notebook for every manuscript, and then I jot down ideas that I have as I'm going. And then eventually I get to the point where I think, this is pretty much as I know right now. I just need to start writing and see how things go. And so then I usually write the first draft really from beginning to end. And then I would say that I do probably 2 rounds of revision on my own before I would send it to the first critique partner, because I know the first drafts are really rough. Like the example with A Dragonbird in the Fern, my first draft was less than half in length. It was so short, and there was so much missing in terms of the characters and some side plots and things like that. So all that has to be brought in. And then I guess I would do like 2 to 3 rounds with critique partners before I'm ready to send it to an agent or a publisher or something like that. So I definitely have learned that I need to have that outline. I need to know the ending and some of the major plot points going through it. If I don't have that, then I do get stuck, and I just, it just stops. So that's definitely something I decided I can't start without. That doesn't mean, though, that I don't sometimes procrastinate or get, distracted by life in general, whether it's my day job or family or things like that. I mean, sometimes things can slow down anyway, but I would say having that outline really helped me. And I built my own kind of an outline. There are different resources out there in case anyone watching this is interested in being a writer. There's one called Save the Cat Writes a Novel. It's a really strange name, but Save the Cat Writes a Novel is really helpful to kind of tell you the story structure that usually will work. Obviously, you could vary it and things like that, but so I took parts of that and then parts of other things I found online and just things that seemed like they worked to me, and kind of I'll put them all together into an Excel sheet, and then I fill it out every time. So I think first I would say I don't always manage to do all of it. I know some people say you have to write every day, and I 100% do not believe that. I write when I can and when I manage to. So I guess my typical day, if I am writing or revising, and I can manage to squeeze it in, would be to go to work in the morning, and then in the afternoon come back home, probably have lunch and walk my dog, and then come back and then try to work for an hour or two and it could be on anything. It could be on publicity for Dragonbird, or it could be actually working on revising a manuscript like I'm doing right now, or drafting a new manuscript. But it doesn't mean, like I said, I don't do that every day. Sometimes, like if I have a day off from my day job, those are the best days because I can spend more time writing. And whereas a day job day, I might not write at all. Sometimes on the weekends I can do a little more. So there's not really a typical day, but it's, yeah, kind of across a whole week. I usually do try at least to write for a few days. Yeah. So I don't have a book that's coming out yet, but what I'm working on now, I have two actually that I'm working on. I'm kind of finishing up revisions on a young adult alternate history that's set in West Germany in 1986. So back when, the Berlin Wall was still up, and but it's alternate history, so there's some big differences too. And then the thing I just started working on is another YA fantasy, and it has to do with a stolen book and magic gone wrong. So I guess, let's see, I have a couple of pieces. The first one is to read a lot. Reading really helps. And I know I've known some writers who say things like, oh, well, I don't have time to read. And I mean, for a short time, that happens to everyone. But I think if you don't read over long periods of time, then I don't know, you don't get the inspiration, you don't learn what works and things like that. So that would be one thing. Another thing I would say is to learn to accept critique. You don't have to agree with everything, and you don't have to implement everything. But it's good to listen to it. It's good to think about it and decide which things work for you and which don't. And especially, really a great way to do that is to work with other people, like a critique partner, who basically you critique them, they critique you, because you learn both sides of it. And then I guess I would say, for someone who's maybe concerned about, like, can I even do this? Does anybody even care what I have to say? Is in the beginning, just write for you. Just, try to do it without any pressure. You don't have to try and be, the youngest author ever published, things like that. Just write for you, something that you like. And then someday, maybe you'll say, you know what, maybe this is good enough that someone can read it. And, you can go from there. I would say that most authors out there, their first book that they ever wrote is not the first one that was ever printed. There are plenty of examples of people who took 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 books before they finally found something that was good enough to get published. So, I mean, in a way that might sound scary and daunting, if you're a writer and you think, oh, and then maybe I have to write 11 books before I get published. But it's fun too, right? I mean, you probably write because you enjoy it, and you learn constantly what works, what doesn't work, and you have all these worlds and characters that you get to have in your head. So that's also a benefit. So you're very smart to make me restrict to 3 because I love reading, I love books. So one book that I read recently, I think it came out about a year ago, and it's really good. It's called Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. It's a YA fantasy, and it's really amazing. I highly recommend it. Another one I would say is a YA science fiction book. It's called Crown Chasers, and it's by Rebecca Coffendaffer, and it's basically about different people vying to get the crown to a galactic empire. So that's also really good. What am I going to say for my third one? How about The Sound of Stars by Alicia Dow? It's also a YA science fiction, but it's set on Earth after basically aliens have kind of taken over the planet, and there's a girl who is basically a secret rebel librarian because books are contraband, and so she still manages to get them to people. And so that's a really good one with a lot of social commentary too. Just all 3 of them are great, and I could name like 50 more, but I won't.
No, thank you. I'm sure I'll definitely be checking those out for my next read, though the list is just growing and growing. It doesn't seem to get shorter.
I know.
Yeah. But thank you so much for speaking with us today, Ms. Rueckert. I'm sure viewers enjoyed the conversation and learned as much as I did. Stay on the lookout for the next installment of our speaker series. And remember to check out our website, BookOrators.org, and follow us on Facebook, on Instagram at BookOrators.